Even a closed business in a facility like this has enormous outgoings. You're in contracts with your power companies, but the outgoings of this business are still up around 60 grand for this month when you're closed. So it's to sustain this into an unknown distance. It's a little bit hard to determine what the outcome will be for Brae.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. With travel restrictions in place, regional restaurants took the biggest hit of their lives. For most, takeaway just wasn't an option. With some suggesting that travelling abroad could be 1 or 2 years away, will this create a unique opportunity for regional restaurants to experience a boom in trade? Dan Hunter is one of the world's most celebrated chefs. His restaurant, Brae, in regional Victoria, rang the bell at number 44 in the world's best restaurant list. Dan's with us now. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. How are you going?
I'm not too bad today. I wondered, we're going to talk about a lot of things, and I know particularly producers, which you're very passionate about, and the impact on them, but I wondered if we could just start by giving us your experience of how everything happened and when things started to change for you.
Well, look, I think things were changing sort of long before the sort of March 23rd forced closure date, or 22nd, was it? 22nd, 23rd. The few weeks leading up to that were very difficult. Obviously, swag of cancellations, which for us, as for most restaurants, is difficult. It meant for us having to revisit our cancellation policy quite closely as well, and not just to appear to be, making good with a bad situation. So, being a regional restaurant with a pretty tight dining room, a smallish dining room, and high demand, which we're lucky to have it in that time, means that late cancellations have a real impact on what we do. And so we have a fairly strict cancellation policy, and so sort of charging people a full price for that in that period when I guess most people were feeling quite anxious, and it was quite difficult, we had to revisit that. So that was sort of all just lost income in that time. And then of course I really feel as though that last 7 days was what most people may remember as some of the most difficult times, particularly those who are owning businesses and leading teams. Some of the most difficult times I can recall in my working career, to be honest. Goalposts changing every 2 days. We sort of went from that period of you're open with high anxiety in society and within our teams as well. And then, of course, okay, you can be open, but you must reduce numbers. Then you must reduce numbers again immediately. So that, when you've got a full restaurant booked and you're told that tomorrow you can't have that full restaurant, you've got to then contact your guests and go through the disappointment that some may show towards you in that regard when you're just trying to do the right thing. And then, of course, the final moment of, okay, by midday tomorrow there's no more trading as a restaurant or cafe. And look, I've got to say from a personal point of view that decision made by the federal government at that moment gave myself and Jules, my wife, who I run the business with, a sense of relief, to be honest, a sense of not being the ones to have to make what was, considered a health decision for the whole benefit of your team and all your guests. So that moment then was a moment of a little bit of stress release, but obviously very soon after that, within that 24 hours, it's a huge impact of, well, what the fuck do we do now type situation. It's a bit of a blur now, that period. But I think within all of this, while we sort of try to navigate what the future may hold, and particularly one that we don't understand, I don't think anyone understands at this point, that week will certainly be deep in my scarring, you know what I mean? Like, I do recall, working on the Saturday service and cooking a section and thinking, I just cannot maintain this level of expectation and these standards under this much anxiety as to, are we doing the right thing and are we safe? So highly stressful period, but certainly, that's obviously past now, and we'll just see what happens in the future.
Do you think the industry has changed forever?
I think it's very difficult to make assumptions on everyone's behalf in this period. I think it's very difficult also to assume the change that lies before us because, just reflecting on that period we just discussed, in that period, in a space of 7 days, an external force to our industry, obviously our government regulates our society, but the federal government, state governments in that period pretty much took full charge of any direction, income, all of those things in one foul swoop. So to make a suggestion today that the future is going to be X rather than Y, I don't have the confidence at this moment to make a decision or make a comment on that. I do know that individuals have probably changed, and I do know there's going to be deep sort of financial scarring within our industry. And obviously we've seen that already, and we're feeling that as well. And I think, one thing that I've realised in this period is I'm probably not the most adaptable person that lives on the planet. I'm more slow burn and thought out and considered in that sense. And Brae, as people experience it today, is the result of many, many, many years of consideration and I guess a fair few practice runs. And of course we tweak it and refine it, and I hope it will always evolve. But to spin around in 24 hours and just, pull a rabbit out of a hat, that's just not my style. So it's been quite difficult in that sense to sort of regain balance.
Can you give us a picture of what the current circumstances are for Brae and what you did to sort of through this period to perhaps save the business or even keep busy? And can you tell us what's been happening? Yeah, well,
I guess, the whole lead up to the closure period was one of hopefully sharing the most up-to-date information with the whole team. And within that information, whether it be, space restrictions or numbers restrictions in the space or health advice from the leading health authorities and that type of, information, one of the key issues that were flagged in that 7 days was the potential standing down of the team. And obviously, when you're going into team briefings before a service at our level, to be dropping this type of information and telling people that potentially, we want to do every single thing possible to keep you safe, but one of those measures may require standing down, of everyone's, employment. It's not the greatest motivational tool, I've got to tell you. Going into some of those services, I can't imagine it wasn't particularly pleasant. But anyway, so on that day we had, I guess, 32 sort of staff on the books, including ourselves, and sort of 15 of those full-time, 15 casual and a couple of part-timers, and they were initially stood down. We kept in that period, and still today we've kept our full-time, our head gardener, and our head chef, so Nina, our head gardener, and Damien, our head chef, we've kept them both working full-time. And then, I guess as soon as the JobKeeper announcement was made, we were able to bring, and of course we gave the option to the team, to be honest, because some of our staff, single mums, some of those, as an example, receiving other health benefits or, social benefits, and may have chosen to remain on those benefits rather than going on to the JobKeeper program. But most have decided to come back onto the JobKeeper program. Obviously, the increased rate to them is very beneficial, and we were probably in a fortunate position at that stage that we did have some income in the bank once paying all of our suppliers. We had we had some funds so that we could cover the wages for that period. Obviously, that's not applicable to all businesses, and I'm sure there's a hell of a lot who would have liked to have been on that program that just cannot be because of that situation. So we were able to do that, and we've been doing that, and obviously we're looking forward to some payments from the government this week, hopefully. But I mean, that's sort of a 90,000 or so subsidy that's got to come to cover that. So that's that's $100,000 without trading that you've got to cover. And so really we just sort of started nutting out what is possible in this facility, because you're right in the intro. We don't have the opportunity just to flip into walk up takeaway. We don't have the opportunity really just to jump into delivery, and we don't have a population surrounding us. Although we have a very supportive community in this area, we don't have the physical numbers to sustain the income that the business has been built to deal with. So we do have a farm, and we did have a farm heavily planted out in summer product, completely organic and of extreme quality. So, the logical step at that point was just, okay, let's just pick the shit out of the garden and just put it in boxes and try and flog it off,
Yeah.
And, and that's sort of a quick fix, and probably wasn't it's probably not a very educated solution, and it's certainly not a sustainable solution for what we're set up to do. And obviously what we realise is that the types of food that we grow and specialise in for the restaurant are not necessarily the types of food that translate straight away to take-home vegetable boxes, And certainly ongoing, we're not a market garden, and we do grow things that take often a hell of a long time to germinate, and then propagation is difficult, and then, time in the ground can be, a salsify or something more, specific or specialised. You're talking sort of 6 to 8 months in the ground. So that's not a cash crop, that's for sure. So so we sort of set about doing that initially, and funnily enough, we have been able to maintain some level of sustenance by doing that, and we're still harvesting today, and we sort of shift a gear with Nina to then start to plant much quicker sort of cash crop type situation vegetables, and much closer planted, and really utilising the space a bit more tighter, knowing that we're not going to have guests sort of in the space. It doesn't have to be so aesthetically pleasing, and in that funny sense, like some quite great successes in that sense have been like a green manure crop that was in a couple of beds that was just literally planted as lots of leftover or expired seeds that we had, just mixed with some brassicas, so legumes and brassicas essentially. So perfect sort of green manure crop anyway, that was going to be put into prior to a garlic crop going in, and essentially it's just grown in the most magnificent sort of mixed sort of species cover crop that's now in maturity, and we've been harvesting quite a lot from that, and it's been quite a lesson actually. Nina and I were discussing this last week. It's been a real lesson in growing food, in the sense that you sort of have this idea of these like structured rows and there's spacings and harvesting and all that type of thing, and occasionally if you get it right, if the seed mix is right and the soil's right and the weather's right, and you just chuck it all in, and it's got a purpose of being a biofumicant, and then it's all of a sudden it's the most delicious mixed food. So Jules, Ivy, my daughter, and myself have been eating out of that little patch quite regularly, like daily, obviously, and it's been a feature in the boxes. But like the boxes are great, and probably one of the things that may differentiate what we've been doing as to some others have been doing a similar concept has been that everything in the box has come off the property, and to date, I mean, today we started selling stuff on the March the 31st, and it's there's been I think 87 boxes to the value of about $75 produced out of that garden patch that's set up for a restaurant. So that's great. I mean, that's $6.5 grand, but $6.5 grand. If you took $6.5 grand in a restaurant service, you'd be shooting yourself, you're doing things wrong. That's one service. So $6.5 for boxes for a month, it doesn't really cover the outgoings. And I guess that's what one of the things that perhaps those who aren't so close to business or business management understand is that even a closed business in a facility like this has enormous outgoings. You're in contracts with your power companies. You've got, and I mean, we have a rent relief situation. We're very lucky and we appreciate that. But the outgoings of this business are still up around $60,000 a year, a month, for this month, when you're closed. So it's to sustain this into an unknown distance. It's a little bit hard to determine what the outcome will be for Brae.
With social distancing and perhaps the industry being allowed to slowly reopen and with some restrictions, do you think you'll reopen, or do you think your best bet is to open with a full restaurant when there's no more restrictions?
I believe we need to see. I mean, again, Huck, it's really difficult to comment with clarity on really important decisions. And I guess for me, it's about consuming information in the most detail at the moment and reacting to it in a way that's best for our business and for our family. So. And that's always been the case, and it's an unusual thing to say, because I know one of the things I think has been difficult maybe for our team to deal with in this period has been the amount of information required to consume and the ever-changing landscape that's occurring. And I think if you work at Brae, one thing that you get is very clear information, and we don't really change we don't change day to day. Like, you don't walk in one day and you do things one way and you ask me the next day and we've changed it. Like, it's very clear. We are who we are. We have a standard, and we have an ethos, and we have a way of doing things, and we sort of do that. And if we change it, we'll agree on it, and then we move forward. To be saying, okay, now we're going to do this, and in 3 days later there's new information that Jules and myself have digested and come up with a plan, and then to sort of feed that out into our team, you sort of wonder if there's not the feeling of, do these guys know what's going on, or what's going on, So because we don't know what's going on, I don't think any of us know exactly what the hell's going on and what decisions that we need to make to sustain our futures long into the future, So I guess for us, that's lifting social distancing is fantastic. If we're confident that there's no health risk, I believe that's the way forward. I have every intention to reopen Brae as a restaurant. I have every intention to reopen it at the standard, if not more than has been expected of us since we did open. I don't see that this is the end of our business. I certainly assume that there will be some significant decrease in numbers. I certainly assume there will be some significant decrease in perhaps people's desire to be in a restaurant for long periods, and particularly at this level of detail. And when I say detail, that means price point. But we'll just have to wait and see, because, we are who we are. As I said before, I'm not the greatest adapter overnight. When we make a decision to say who will be in the future, will be very, very considered based on the information that's available. Obviously, in this time, knowing that there's potential for decrease in numbers and spend and all of those things, there's no doubt that we need to address the ability to, have other types of revenue coming into the business to sustain who we are. Certainly by offering what we've been doing in terms of take-home meals and more so the bakery and the products based on the wheat that we grow and the vegetables that we farm and produce. I believe that, and it's funny because it's something that we've always talked about. It's something that we've actually been considering for some significant time, and are sort of at least 50% away down the track to having a type of retail outlet of some description based on bakery and sort of stuff off the farm. And then I guess, if anything, this may push that ahead a bit faster, and hopefully, I've had the discussion with Nina already about, how do we maintain this even when the restaurant is open, given that there may be a reduction in numbers. So, and so we're in a headspace of considering those things. But shit, it'd be good to be just a restaurant, wouldn't it? And then
be good to just eat in a restaurant.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing. I mean, my love of restaurants is probably similar to yours. It's about being in them and being part of them, and certainly running one is highly pleasurable for me, and it's something that I really, really love doing. But sitting at a table with some close friends or family or special partners and eating and drinking and just sharing what everyone else is sharing is certainly high on the list for me too.
What are some of the positives to come out of this situation for you?
Be tough to find them, I reckon. I mean, I don't know. Look, I must say, without sounding smug or certainly taking away from the terrible experience that maybe some others have experienced in this period, that living in a small community, living in a situation that is already almost adhering to the social distancing rules that we're all struggling with, having that space, having that time to sort of slow and get to bed early and get up early. I tell you what, I don't fucking sleep anymore, that's for sure. I bloody wake up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm like, okay, let's go. I'm having to force myself some days to go back to bed because it's just too early to get up. So having those moments, I guess, to be with family. I must say, being, having this sort of very, I guess, very close time with Jules and Ivy. She's a single child. She's 9 years old. She's going through huge anxieties, like probably lots of kids are with this thing going on. That's been really good to have those moments. We've just rekindled the Sunday lunch, and it's been nice to be fresh and focused on a Sunday morning and wanting to cook and cooking quite extravagant things some Sundays. So that's been really good. But it's very hard to still enjoy that. I mean, those feelings you tend to have sometimes when you're on holiday and you're away from your normal life, but that the normal life is still operating back somewhere else. So if you do give yourself time to focus on anything that you'd like to do in that, what we'd say as a normal environment, that normal being what we know to be our society, you've sort of got this clear picture in your mind as to how these ideas may formulate or may exist in that scenario. But given that we don't know or understand that, it's very difficult for me to sit down and to make plans for the future, or to sort of, meditate on those ideas of what this place could be, or even work creatively on, okay, so when we return, the food could be like this, or the garden could have this, or whatever, all of those things. It's just such a difficult, the outlook's so unclear that it's very difficult to have those clear sort of meditative thoughts on the future.
Yesterday I had a chat with Matt Moran, and he mentioned that he thought regional restaurants may have the best hope of reopening early and successfully due to people's desire to get out and about with restrictions eased, given that we won't be travelling overseas for some period. Do you think he's right? What do you think about that? Do you think that there will be an opportunity for regional restaurants?
Look, I mean, without this sounding like just blatant advertising for our business, I mean, I think that, Brae is in a really strong position if we can financially, bounce through this or whatever, and again, we don't know the period of time that we're discussing here. We don't know, what is this year? Is this next week? Is it next July? Is it, what is it? Because all of those decisions have a huge impact on on the truth of my answer. But, I would say that the concept that we've built here, the idea that we had, 10 plus years ago of what this restaurant would be, a place of space, a place of, relaxation, a place of detail, completely organic, a place of what would say are the, even more so right now, the true luxuries of the current world, of absolutely traceable, clean food, cared for with detail, presented with detail, really hands-on service. I think, I really feel as though some of the decisions that we made a long time ago and the way we've been living and operating in the period leading up to now are the things that will really, hopefully, make the experience of being at Brae something that people are really looking forward to and happy to sort of, jump on board with. So, and I mean, perhaps this is there's lots of dialogue around the world at the moment about this being the wake-up call that we needed and this being environmentally, really great and all these types of situations that, carbon emissions are down, people talking about food security, all these types of things. These are things that often get just really pushed under the table in the sort of cheap, fast-moving, easy access society that, whether we like it or not, has been built for us and many of us participate in. And I would hope that a slower, more considered, food system, a more traceable food system, a conversation, an open dialogue, much closer with our restaurants and, I guess, our producers and suppliers and growers and farmers and those of us who have them as our friends. I think all of those things are really important, and hopefully that some of those things and people who have been, I guess, have showed interest in knowing more about these concepts. Certainly this is the catalyst to perhaps take it on board a bit more wholeheartedly.
Now, you did a post on Instagram fairly recently championing local producers and what they've been going through with the bushfires and now this. What's some of the stories and some of the conversations you've had with the people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis with the restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, I think for growers of food, it's not very easy to wake up one morning and your whole customer base has disappeared. Now, as restaurants, obviously we know that we've had the same thing, but there's another link in that chain, and it's the people who grow food for restaurants, and people who have chosen, which they have every right to, as a business decision, to work very closely with restaurants and with chefs, and whose whole business is taken up with providing food for restaurants. So probably the least considered in this whole scenario, but for a small family growing situation, you're talking about generally smaller farms, often employing a couple of people, but often just running it with the family, and growing a limited supply of excellent quality food, which requires, slower growing, longer periods of animals on the property, obviously higher feed costs for that. Often people who have dedicated a very long time to working very ecologically sound and putting a lot of effort into the environmental, I guess, capacity and longevity of their farms. These people have lost their income overnight, and they also can't just turn to takeaway the next day. So they're often in, they're always in regional areas. So not only are they not a place that has foot traffic, but they also don't have access to customers who have now, particularly during a lockdown period where no one's meant to be on the roads travelling or anything like that. So, for people that we work closely with, one of the things that they've had to deal with is that, in the space of 24 hours, they've basically had 100% of their business just stopped. Their revenues just stopped. Now, some of those are in the middle of growing cycles. Some perhaps have, had the abattoir booked that morning, all of those types of things. So I know a lot of people, we look at sort of three specific sort of families that we deal with, and it's, Greg and Jodie Clark at Great Ocean Ducks, Save and Laura Mead, Birregurra Pork, a really great pork producer we've only used for a little while, a couple of years out of the Otways, and Bruce and Ros Burton at Milking Yard Farm. Now they're people who deal solely with restaurants, and so they've had to really flip what they do and really, look for new ways of maintaining an income. And so for most of those guys, they're now having to seek out retail, do online sales. A couple of them have been able to work a bit more closer and give a bit more product to some higher end butchers in Melbourne. But, often they don't have the means or the network to just find. One thing about restaurants is we have I must say, we have a great network. So I must say one of the very, heartwarming and reassuring things during this period for me has been the increased contact with other people, other chefs, other people in this industry who are in the same situation. And certainly, whether it be a text or a short conversation or whatever, just to say good day and make sure people are okay. That's been, you really know who your mates are, and you really know who you can rely on in that regard. So that's been really good. But for the suppliers, the growers, I had some conversations with a couple of people yesterday, and they're certainly remaining strong. They've certainly been very appreciative of the fact that we've been using their products in our take-home meals. So each week we've been trying to sort of showcase a specific supplier that we have a relationship with, and sort of build a meal around that for the people who purchase those meals to take home. So hopefully doing two things. You'd never really read the name of a producer on our menu. We prefer to have the conversation at the table with our guests about who people are, and now doing these sort of take-home meals and heated home meals, we've been making sure that we make a real effort to promote the producer by name, and hopefully that leads to some people sort of following up on that information and trying to purchase their products online or on a butcher or whatever. But I think it's most of our guys have said we're okay. We're doing a lot of reevaluation of how we function. We realise that we do need to work in some retail capacity, which we're trying to find pathways to that. But it's a difficult time, there's no doubt. And it's not, it's time consuming, and it's not often to people's, to their strong points. I mean, the greatest farmer in the world may not be the greatest, user of Instagram. So,
totally.
They're not using PR companies, and they're not and they're not having the conversation. I mean, sometimes it's hard to get a word out of it, out of a farmer. Thankfully most of ours are pretty chatty, but there's a lot people are really going outside their comfort zone to stay afloat, but also realising that that's what's needed, and because it's needed, they're doing that.
Just moments ago, you were talking about that connection that you're having with chefs that are going through the same sort of thing. Now, Spain, this is a global issue, and Spain has had a massive impact by the virus, and you spent a lot of time in Spain as the chef de cuisine at Mugaritz. I just wondered, have you been in contact with anyone there, and what's...
Yeah, I mean, I've had contact with Andoni from Mugaritz on several occasions, and it's pretty... I mean, again, talking about highly positive people who are adaptable and under most situations can make a move that's probably positive for them and their teams and families. But look, I think I haven't had any conversations in the last couple of weeks, but certainly, you go back 3 weeks or so at the height of this pandemic in Spain, when we're talking serious amounts of deaths and real fear in the community. And I certainly don't recall having many conversations with Andoni at Mugaritz that was so heartfelt and emotional. Certainly for someone to describe the situation as, horrific and terrible and it was quite intense actually. I think as much as we are who we are and every country is different, I think we do all have to be quite grateful for the fact that the situation that we've experienced so far from a health perspective, which is one, I think, where people in some parts of Europe in particular, and probably, the States, New York, where the level of anxiety is that, you or a friend could die. I don't think that we probably got to that level, so to speak, in Australia. Although it has occurred, I think en masse, I think there was a real fear, and probably still is to some degree, and is, that if you get this thing, you're dead. And I think that when you're functioning and trying to make business decisions with that in your mind, and it's not at the back of your mind, it's at the forefront, I think it's quite a terrible space to be in.
Now, on a lighter note,
that'd be a good idea.
Yes. And, when restaurants are open again and people travel out to Brae, what are you going to be looking forward to most?
Well, just the connection. I just think one thing that I think we're all missing is that human-to-human contact. And, I think, restaurants, there's no doubt about it. There's the ones that there's the food that you eat on the way to somewhere else, and there's the food that you consume and the experiences you have when you want to celebrate. And I always hope that Brae is a restaurant of celebration, and certainly, part hedonism. And I think we're sort of, for a lot of us who enjoy the hedonistic nature of just day-to-day life and the hedonistic nature certainly of being in restaurants and forgetting about time and look, let's be fair, overconsumption, like that just going for it with your friends. I really, one thing that I most enjoy is facilitating that, and of course, being a chef and running a restaurant, and having a number of friends who are of the same, the same makeup. They're cooks or they work front of house and they own or work or run restaurants. Some of the greatest pleasure in the world for me is to cook for people who understand what you do and don't often get the chance to do it and spend their life doing it for others. I think, the most pleasurable thing for me is to cook for other chefs and to cook for other restaurateurs and cook for people who truly appreciate the effort and the nuts and bolts of what makes a great restaurant, and they appreciate the detail and all the backstory and the hours and years spent doing the things that people don't necessarily see. So, and look, I reckon, many of us are going to really want to spend some time in restaurants. So I hope that people want to do that here, and we can facilitate, that coming back into society sort of situation. I think for a restaurant where people tend to spend 3 to 5 to bloody 6, 7 hours some days, I think hopefully people are really going to want to do that, and we really look forward to guests who really want to do that.
Well, as someone who's really missing restaurants, you've just made me miss them even more, I think. Dan, You're amazing. Thanks so much for giving us your time, and please stay in touch and hopefully talk again soon.
Thanks, Huck.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Stay safe and be well.